Welcome to the TryPod, where we break down the NRL every game, every week from a punting perspective. I'm Jacob Wynn. I'm here to talk about the two preliminary finals. Geez, the season is roaring to a close. It's going to be gone before we know it, but we've got some cracking games of footy to enjoy. So I think this is going to be an awesome pod, just because I'm so excited to talk about these couple of games. What I've got on the screen is the results from last weekend, which, of course, we've got to cover. And I only went 1 and 2, so I've gone 1 and 4 in the finals, unfortunately. Hopefully you can still see me. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but some people couldn't see me last week. And for some reason, my background's not working. So I don't have that nice sort of royal gold behind me, but we'll make do. Look, just getting the wrong end of the stick on these bets in the finals. I don't think any of them have been bad bets. You go back to, you lose the opening finals best bet on an 90-meter intercept with 3 minutes to go to beat the total. What else did I have? First week, I had another losing bet. I think it was a Brisbane unders, and then you get a Walshy masterclass, and Brisbane scoring 3 tries in the final 15 minutes. Then on the weekend, I had Raiders Sharks either team 1-12, and we'll get into that. But obviously losing Ethan Strange on game day really hurt the Raiders, and then just, as great as Cronulla were, obviously just a few fortunate moments for Cronulla. That try that took forever to be awarded off that bomb, and I'm still not sure it was a try. And then Canberra gave up in the final few minutes when it just got a bit too hard. And of course, Cronulla gets the back-breaking try, and I need the team to I had Cronulla to not exceed 30 points, as well as the Raiders to not exceed 30, and of course Cronulla gets 32, and it's not a 1-12 margin. So then I've lost both of them. And then I did win Bulldogs. I told you the Bulldogs would get 3 tries. They actually covered the total of 12.5 with just 2 tries because they got that early penalty goal. But I wasn't particularly right on that game, to be fair. The one bet that I've cashed, I told you the Dogs could keep it close, and the Dogs got obliterated by Penrith and scored 3 very cheap second half tries. So it's funny how I've talked about you benefit with overs sometimes when a game blows out. You get those soft ones. That was no congratulations to the Bulldogs attack or anything. That was just a game that was already over, and the Dogs just tossing it around and getting a little bit of joy against a team that was already thinking about the week ahead, to be fair. I'll talk about those games a little bit more, right, in a moment. We've got these awesome prelims, and of course, we're going to have best bets. I've got a couple to share, and I'll go deep dive on the 2 games, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. In fact, why don't you tell me right now, who's your grand final pick, guys? What I love about this weekend slate is that really any of the 4 combinations are very viable and very realistic, and that's not always the case. So I just want to talk about prelims and, the history of prelims, because I've got a lot of messages about particularly this Broncos-Panthers game. And, you'd think, prelims are always going to be some of the best games of the year. Well, last year, the Storm and Panthers were both big favourites in their respective prelims, and they both won 13+. 2 years ago, the Broncos and Panthers were both big favourites, double-digit favourites. No one really thought New Zealand was going to go and win in Brisbane, or Melbourne that year weren't as strong, and Penrith was so good. And in fact, Brisbane and Penrith both dominated and won 13+ 2 years ago. So and I'm not saying that closer markets like what we've got this year guarantees a close final margin. I mean, just look at the weekend I just mentioned. Sharks, Raiders, close bloody pick 'em, and it was a 20-point margin. But I just love the fact that, any result you could talk yourself into, and I'm going to talk about both sides of each equation, of course. So love to see your grand final predictions in the comments, just to take the pulse of our audience. Who are people sort of liking or leaning in terms of the winners this weekend? Look, let's do best bets, and then let's talk about historically. I've done a bit of my own research. The question that everyone's been asking me is, how often is the home team an underdog? And did I think Brisbane should be an underdog this weekend? Was I surprised? And it's hard because when people ask me, were you surprised by the odds this weekend? Are you surprised? It's like I have to tread carefully. If I haven't done the pod yet, I can't say No, I'm not surprised. I think Penrith's going to win, but I also don't want to say to people, yeah, I am surprised. I think Brisbane should be favourite because I don't show anybody my hand prior to the pod, so that if you're watching live, you get the first opportunity to have a crack at these. And in fact, both of my best bets are on the Sunday game, Broncos Panthers, and I'm going either team 1 to 12 at $1.80 on 365 because I do have a lean to Brisbane, and I do think it's a dead set coin toss. And I do think that's a sky high total. I know both attacks have looked so good in the finals so far, but I feel like they can cancel each other out to a degree, despite the fact it's a daytime game. And look, it could still be pretty high scoring and tight. I just think this one's going to be on a knife edge. I just think it's going to be an absolute belter and could be similar quality to the 2023 grand final itself, where Brisbane's going to be looking for some revenge. And I am actually going to also play both teams under 30.5. So that's different to neither to 30 because they can get up to 30 points. That's the same gamer that you can build on Sportsbet. It's also $1.80. So just take each team's team total under 30.5 because I think that both sides will enjoy success, but neither of them's going to score easily. Like, I want to talk about how easily Penrith did score against the Bulldogs, and now everyone's thinking that Penrith are the Harlem Globetrotters, but I actually think part of that was just that the Dogs were so poor. And yes, of course, Brisbane did score 29 points in 94 minutes in Canberra, but I also thought there was just something freaky about, those late tries in that game, not something that you can just bottle up and capture every week, and certainly not against this professional Penrith team. So that's my two best bets. Okay, so the question, people saying, geez, how are Brisbane not a favourite? And, usually the home team is the favourite in the prelims because that's the team that would have won in the first week of the finals as in a top 4 matchup. And that's the team that, in addition to having home advantage, has the massive edge of not having played in week 2, right? So I went back and looked at every prelim in the last 11 years. I went back 11 years until I found a team that was an underdog at home. And then going back beyond that, my memory of the odds was a little bit hazy, right? So if you're interested, as I said, last couple of years, big home favourites, and they won big. So there were no surprises. Where have I got my notes, though? Yeah, in fact, every home team in the prelims in the last 3 years has been a very clear favourite. You go back to 2021, and South's Manly was close to pick'em. Souths had the week off. Manly lost in week 1 of the finals, but did have a red-hot turbo. And Souths were just a slight 1.5-point favourite. So that's not the same as Brisbane, who are a dog. But I just noted that was at least close to pick'em. But for what it's worth, the pod was on Souths that day, and Souths won that prelim by 20 points. Then you've got to go all the way back to 2015, and it involves Brisbane. And I went to this game at Suncorp. 2015, the prelim, Brisbane were rested at home, but the Roosters had a red-hot side and came into Suncorp, and that was a pick'em game. But the pod was on Brisbane, and the Broncos did win by 19 points on that occasion. The same year, of course, you remember 2015, Broncos played Cowboys. The Cowboys went down to Melbourne. The Cowboys lost week 1 of the finals. I think they might have lost to Brisbane. And then had to go the long way around, but the Cowboys got a walkover in week 2, were pretty fresh, went down to Melbourne. Now, that's no easy feat, but that was pick'em. You might think surely Melbourne would have been a favourite at home with a week off, but you got to remember that Cowboys team was so good. Thurston was at the peak of his powers, and of course, the Cowboys won that game. I think the pod was on the Cowboys that night too at pick'em, and you know how it went down. The Cowboys obviously won in Golden Point in a grand final for the ages. Then and help me out if you guys have any better data than me. I couldn't find any good historical records of odds, so I was going purely off my memory of the odds, which is probably pretty good. Like I always say to people, I have people say to me that I've got an uncanny recollection of games and stats and stuff, and I always say I wish I could remember more useful stuff, but for whatever reason, my brain is great at remembering players or plays or details from sporting events 20 years ago. That's never really going to help me further in life, but I'll share it with you now. 2014, that's pre-pod. We've been going 11 years, but we're obviously still punting before we did the pod. And I remember 2014 was Canterbury-Penrith in the prelim. And I actually had a Bulldogs Souths Quinella ticket. And I can't remember the odds, but I actually think the Dogs were favourites despite coming from outside of the 4. And I remember being quietly confident, and the Bulldogs did win by a try over Penrith. And then I started going, well, 2013, maybe Manly was actually a road favourite against Souths, but it's a bit different when you get 2 Sydney teams. And I'm not sure. As I said, I've got a pretty good recall of odds, but you're going back 12 years now. I'm not sure. So summary is, it's very rare that the home team is an underdog. It takes a very special away team to be favoured in a prelim, because they would usually be a lower seed and they would have played the week before, and they're not at home. As Dane says, Penrith played their grand final last week, but I would argue, and let's talk about last week now, thanks DJ, I would argue that it was more of a training run for Penrith, and it sets them up very nicely to play extremely well again this weekend. But since I've got the scores on the screen, let's go in chronological order. Let's talk about Raiders Sharks, which again really annoys me, because I told you I like Sharks. The line was 4.5 a week ago, but then I took the either 1 to 12. Okay, so of course the underdog won outright by 20. And I liked unders, which is why I went neither team to 30 roughly. And so of course it actually goes under. The total was 46.5, but Cronulla got too many points. So, that's brutal. I've somehow found 2 plays in a game where I like Sharks and unders. Sharks and unders hit, and I've gone 0-2. Now, the strange illness, when that news broke, you wouldn't have thought that hurt our best bets, because the favourite lost one of their best attacking weapons, right? And the game went into Pick'em. And if you've got either 1 to 12, Pick'em's the best spot you can be in. It's as close as possible. And yeah, Strange being out certainly shouldn't have hurt the unders. But the problem was, once the Raiders got down in the second half, that they were searching for points and they were coming up empty, and Strange really would have helped. And on top of that, it's a psychological blow that the Raiders died. They died inside on that Sunday, that fateful Sunday the week before against Brisbane. In fact, let me just make this point too. Everyone's criticising the Raiders and Bulldogs, and I'll have a word on both of these teams before we move on, right? But isn't it crazy to think how close we were to the Raiders and the Bulldogs being the ones sitting ready to host these prelims? I mean, we feel like we've already forgotten the fact that the Bulldogs led the Storm with 15 to go in Melbourne, and we're down 2 with 5 to go and attacking. The Bulldogs could have easily won that game. And then, of course, the Raiders literally thought they did win that game against Brisbane. And those sides would still be alive and in pole position. And instead, they're, heading off to Bali and fishing right now. So as much as people will say that, those seasons end as a failure for the Raiders and the Bulldogs because of what we saw last, it just goes to show, how big those week 1 games are. And they were both on a knife edge, all right? But clearly, when I tipped Raiders, Sharks, either 1 to 12, if you would have told me Sharks are going to win by 20, I was not going to be shocked. We could see that happening in the sense of the Raiders just couldn't pick themselves up again. It was too much of a mental hurdle. It was a 6-day turnaround, so a physical hurdle too, because you played 3 periods of extra time as well. Of course, no best bet is a certainty, so it's understandable that happened, but it's unfortunate because I think then the double whammy of losing, Strange has been in the Raiders' best 3 players all year, had an awesome year, and he gets a violent sickness the night before the game. They can't even bring Sanders into the team. They've got to play Sasangi out of position, right? I think that probably did do some mental damage. But the other part of it that no one's talking about, we did highlight the Raiders' right edge defense exposed by Reece Walsh in the Broncos loss. And again, the Sharkies had some joy down their left, Raiders right. And so that was a weakness that, the Raiders can only blame themselves. But the other part of it that I have not heard anyone else mention is that the Raiders consistently would drop off between the 30th and 50th minutes. And that was not a coincidence that always coincided with when Tapine and Papali went to the bench. In fact, I think Ricky even experimented earlier in the year with Papali coming off the bench to offset that. But, that was really where Cronulla took a stranglehold of the game. And Cronulla did it to the Roosters too. 2 late tries in the first half sort of flipped the script. But Canberra was up 6-0 when Tapane and Papali went to the bench. And it was 20-12 to the Sharks when they came back on. Now, in fairness to Cronulla, they lost Hazelton early and Fanua Blake had a rest around the same time. But the Sharks middles maintained the authority. The Raiders visibly dropped off, and then on top of that, it's a fortunate try at a terrible moment, because at 20-12, that was when Tapane and Papali came back on, and the Raiders still had a chance to fight back in. I just felt like if the Raiders could have had a moment go their way, they would have got back in the game and we would have probably won both our best bets. But right at that moment, 2 minutes after the two props come on, the Sharkies put up a bomb, it gets spilled or it gets contested, spilled, and then in trying to mop it up, the Raiders actually bat the ball into the arms of Iro and he scores. And the video ref took forever, as I said before. I think AFB was offside. I also think there might have been an accidental offside that the batback might have flicked at AFB, but that just ripped out the Raiders' soul. And that's if they still had a soul, if Brisbane didn't take it from them the week before. So, at that point, we were still in position to win the neither team to 30. We just had to avoid one more late try, which we would have done if the Raiders could have had a little bit more joy in attack. And if the Raiders had scored the last try and not Cronulla, we go 2-0. But the Raiders, I think, gave up a 7-tackle set, Sharkies, and then it ends up being, I think it was Billy Burns, was it? He just dropped the ball on his own boot, like a second rower on 5th tackle, dropped it on his own boot, between the defender's legs, ran round behind him and scored. And so we lost the best bet by a couple of points there. Yeah, it hurt. But that's, the Raiders season, awesome for the most part. Most impressive to me was the first 13. Teague Wilton it was, sorry, Ryan. Yeah, it was left edge. Thanks for correcting me. The first 13 weeks set up the Raiders season. They did not have a bye. They had to go to Vegas. They lost about 2 of their first 13, right? Down the stretch, the Raiders weren't that impressive. I felt like nobody really pushed Canberra other than that miracle in Mudgee, which was an awesome win over Penrith, of course. But a few other games, the Raiders just did enough to win for the most part. It's a young team, but I'll be honest, the Raiders convinced me that they would be very tough to beat, especially in Canberra in the finals. But, in fact, the Raiders were favourites to win the comp for a few days when Jerome Hughes did his shoulder and people thought he was out for the season. That's how high the hopes got, right? But this is what it comes down to for Canberra. I want to touch on these teams that lost last weekend, and then, of course, I'll move on, guys. But, you can't overstate the fact that Canberra, they won the minor premiership. They're at home. There's 20 minutes to go. And they are leading Brisbane 28-12 at GIO. And Carrigan is in the bin. I mean, that is going to haunt you for a long time. Because, of course, if Canberra just holds on there, if Fogarty makes one more conversion, even if they don't hold on, but if Fogarty makes a play in extra time, if the bunker doesn't deny Canberra on either of those occasions, then the Strange illness is a moot point because that happens in an idle week, and it's Canberra who are sitting pretty right now and looking to make a grand final. It's just that close, right? And speaking of Fogarty, he had a great season in his own right, but did miss chances especially in that Brisbane game. Next year, Ethan Sanders gets a shot, although there's rumours about Pezzett. But the thing is, the Raiders want the Storm to loan them Pezzett. If I'm Storm, I'm not loaning him to a contender. I might loan him to the Titans because I don't think that's going to deny us winning the comp. So anyway, that's an interesting sort of sidebar. But let's talk about Panthers Bulldogs. It gives us a chance to refresh on what happened most recently and also just have a final word on a team we're not going to see again. The crazy thing to me, Panthers Bulldogs was 8-6 in June. And then on the weekend, it was 46-26. That's 72 points. I think that's the equal most ever in a finals game. I just want to say the second half was, as I said before, it was meaningless. Okay, so don't look at it and go, oh, geez, maybe Penrith's defense isn't the best. They gave up 26 to the Bulldogs, so they'll give up over 30 to Brisbane. It was, it was over. It was 36-8 at halftime. And what you saw in the second half didn't matter. It was a Dogs team offloading it 10 times a set and still could barely get out of their half and, throwing caution to the wind. And it was a Penrith team where, as professional as the players are, in the back of their mind, they're thinking, don't get suspended, don't get injured. We've got a job to do next week. But let's talk about the first 40 minutes. Look, the Panthers were unreal, and everyone said it's like the best 40 minutes of, I don't know, the season for Penrith and maybe even beyond. Look, the Panthers were great, and they were 20 for 20 completions. So they gave the Dogs basically nothing apart from one line break from halfway where Galvin did score, right? But what really alarmed me was the missed tackles by the Dogs and the contact by the Dogs. And of course, the Dogs had to lick their wounds, and I said they should have rested around 27. And it was a tough loss in Melbourne. We just talked about how the Raiders couldn't pick themselves up again. But I say no excuse for the Bulldogs. You had 60,000 fans cheering you on. You're at home, and you had 9 days to dust yourself off after the Storm loss. And yes, Crichton was out, but you can't blame Crichton. Crichton defends on the right, and the Bulldogs got stripped on the left multiple times. And the Bulldogs are a team that's so fit and so fast and defensively covers as well as anybody. And what I couldn't believe is, yes, the Panthers stripped the Dogs for numbers, but then the cover tackle from Rinakama, from Tracy, from like Sexton, whoever was coming across, they could not tackle Alamotti. Like, the problem was the Dogs falling off tackles, because suddenly a one-on-one cover tackle that should be made, okay, you don't have to stick every tackle, but you got to slow somebody down when they make a line break. And the Dogs weren't even slowing Panthers down. They're just falling off. So suddenly it was a free run to the try line, or it was a draw and pass try. And that was what was crazy to me, is just like, where did that intensity go? Like, why did the Dogs suddenly run out of juice? People want to make it a Galvin story. I don't think it's a Galvin story. Galvin had a crack. And if people say, oh, you never should have replaced Sexton, well, actually, Sexton got to play most of the game in Melbourne and all of the game on the weekend. So it wasn't like they missed Sexton. Did Ciraldo and Gus disrupt the harmony of the team because the team liked Sexton and Marnie and they sort of got displaced? We'll never know the answer to that. I think the loss of Crichton hurt far worse. And look, the Dogs were never beating Penrith on that performance on Sunday. But if Crichton doesn't get injured first half against the Storm, like, maybe Canterbury goes on and wins that game, because it was that close. Yes, it was an 8-point margin, but that's with the intercept late, So, like, Crichton is an all-world player and the captain of the Dogs. It was brutal timing that he would get hurt, and that's all in the same week that they didn't have Cherry and they didn't have Montoya, and then Tuala broke his leg. Like, all of those outside backs were missing for the Dogs against this Melbourne. And then the lead-on effect was, well, now Burton has to play centres. Okay, but now the best kicker in the comp is no longer in the halves, so he can't kick as often. So then it detracts from like another strength that you had, that the Dogs, had a great kicking game and then a great defense on the back of that. So there were follow-on effects from all these cluster injuries. Not to mention, I think the point that we miss is just that superstar factor. Like, you saw what Walsh did to turn a game, or you've seen what Cleary's done recently. Crichton's that type of guy, and the Dogs were denied having a guy like that. And I'm not making an excuse for him on Sunday. I'm just saying probably second half against Melbourne, it could be a different second half if Stephen Crichton is out there. But the Dogs, let's also say the Dogs maybe were never the third best team in the comp. I mean, other teams like the Sharks might have been better than the Dogs, but the Sharks had like a mid-season slump. The Panthers were better than the Dogs, but the Panthers had those struggles early year. The Warriors fell away, and that all helped the Dogs finish top 4, along with a very friendly early draw for the Dogs. And then they got like that free win against Penrith when Penrith played the B team. So, yeah, to me, it's not like, oh, it's because of Galvin that the team fell away. I think people try to make a story out of that. The Dogs definitely lost Critter, and that's just like sort of where they were at. Maybe they were like the 5th best team this year. We will talk more about Penrith, of course, for the breakdown. But I will just say, I said the same thing last week, right? Cleary is playing in a different stratosphere. And I made this joke a week ago, but I've actually seen people genuinely say it. Like, if you're a Blues fan and you don't support Penrith, be honest with me, are you a bit triggered? just watching this guy do whatever he wants on a footy field. But yet, when he was the halfback of your team, which on paper was better than Queensland, or at least as every bit as good, and dominated game 1, was down by 20 points in the first half of game 2 and game 3. And I'll just give you one more little bit of salt, Blues fans. Nathan Cleary had an injury in game 2 and couldn't kick goals. And because of that, Lomax had to take the conversions and he missed a bunch of them and the Blues lost by 2 points. And you watch Cleary kicking in the finals and, if there's any player and your life depended on to kick a goal, we're all picking Nathan Cleary. He's so good and he's so accurate. And missing that goal kicking aspect alone probably cost the Blues the whole series just in Perth, right? So that, I don't know, that would still bother me. I'm a Queenslander, so I'm sort of chuckling about it. But and it's a different game, Origin as opposed to the regular season. But geez, this guy's a freak, and I stand by what I said, what I've been saying for a couple of years. He's the best player I've ever seen in terms of the way he can impact a game. And I've watched the competition for a good 27 years. So I've seen Joey's career, Thurston, anyone I've seen, I put Nathan Cleary at the top of that tree. Not for resume, I won't get into that whole argument, but for ability to influence a game. All right. Now let's move to the 2 games we have ahead that Cleary's going to really want to influence as well. But we talk Friday night first. And I guess another sidebar I would make is I feel like everything has broken beautifully for the Storm. I'm going to make myself smaller so that you can see more of the team list, if I can. I just feel like getting the Friday night game for the Storm when they already had the fortnight off, right? So they don't care which day of the week they're playing on. But if you're Melbourne, you're playing an opponent who had to travel to Canberra and only gets 6 days to prepare for this game, and that includes traveling to Melbourne again, and you get to play them on a Friday. So perfect for you to give you the biggest advantage against your opponent, who happens to be Cronulla. And then if you ask Melbourne, when would you like the other prelim to be? They'll say, oh, well, yeah, could you make it on Sunday so that we have a 2-day advantage should we win over whoever gets through the Sunday game? Because if you're Melbourne, if you do win on Friday night, you recover all weekend, you hit the ground running on Monday. Like I heard people say, oh, it doesn't matter. There's no injury that takes 9 days to recover from instead of 7. It's not the point though. It's like 2 extra days recovery. Then you're earlier into your training. Then you get more valuable training sessions. Whoever wins on Sunday, gets a good, they're going to be doing recovery on Monday. They get a good 1 to 2 days less time to get ready for the biggest game of the year. Now, this is partly because the AFL Grand Final's on. I'm not opposed to it as a sports fan, but to me, I just think the prelims should be within a day of each other to make the Grand Final, as even a playing field as possible. But, if the Sharks happen to win on Friday night, then I'd probably be thankful that they get a little bit more time because they're going to be an underdog against Brisbane or Penrith. So I guess we'll just, it might not really end up being a big issue. But I feel like so often things break well for the Storm. And, that pun was not intended because let's talk about the Storm lineup. You're going to see Jerome Hughes, speaking of breaking well, he broke his arm 3 weeks ago. He's back. We thought Jerome Hughes was out for the season twice now. And he won the Dally M a year ago. And somehow, with the week off, it's enough time for Hughesy to be back in the team. So the line, I should tell you, is 8.5 and 9.5. Storm at home, Amy Park Friday night. But it opened as low as 5.5. So why has it got to nearly 10? You guessed it, because Jerome Hughes is back. I just told you. Pappenhausen returning from that head knock in round 27. Blore is on the bench too, and they had concerns whether he would play again this season. Wishy is on the bench. He had the match-winning try against the Dogs. It gives great cover to this star-studded Storm spine. Howarth and Meany are the centres. Lasati is the second rower where he slotted in last game after Joe Chan got that concussion. You've got Yuto Kamanu, Josh King, Trent Liero are the starting ruckies. And they face, let's talk about Cronulla now, but, in the middle for Cronulla, Fanua Blake, Toby Rudolph, and Jesse Colquhoun. For the Sharkies, in terms of the lineup, just one change which we expected because Hazelton failed his HIA. So Oregon Kaufusi comes into the team via the interchange bench. Billy Burns is in the run-on side again. He is in such good form, Burns, that Nikora has played less than 30 minutes in each of the last 2 games. I feel like surely Fitzy finds a way to increase that time on the field for Nikora. Like, let him play a bit of lock. Like, he's such a talented player. Obviously, his best strength sort of that line running, particularly off Nico Hines. But I don't know. Yeah, it shows the trust that Fitzy has in Burns, that Nikora, I think, has the match fitness now and has not had to be lent on heavily. You got a full strength Sharks back line, right? Kennedy. In terms of the playmakers, Kennedy, Trindle, and Hines, I feel like they're all really in sync. You got Katoa and Mulatalo start those sets strong, and they finish plenty of sets too. Great try finishes. Ramey and Iro, they're wonderful link men. They make great defensive decisions, and that's going to be the key against this full strength Storm outfit. Right. The Sharks have got a strong bench, obviously, when I mentioned Nikora there, but Talakai, Hamlin Welle, they pack so much punch from the Pine. If we look at the matchup between Melbourne and Cronulla, it's not one-sided. They each beat each other at home this year. You go back to the last time they met in the finals was at Amy in week 1 last year, and the Storm, I do admit, were in total control in that finals encounter. And the teams haven't changed much from a year ago, but they both have bolstered their engine room. You look at the free agency arrival. The Storm went out and got young Blues props, Stefano, and of course the Sharkies getting the debt collector AFB, who is perhaps the buy of the season. You know that Fanua Blake will have to be at his devastating best for Cronulla to win this. I mean, look back at any time anybody has ended the Storm season. Like, look at who they've lost to in the finals. Yeah, no surprises. When Melbourne have lost in the finals in the last 3 or 4 years, it's pretty much always been to Penrith. And you can say a big part of that is it's at the hands of Fisher Harris and Leota. In 2023, Brisbane smashed the Storm in the finals and Payne Haas trampled them, And that's why the Storm have addressed that need. It's one of the reasons why the Storm are the best team in the comp this year, I believe. It's not just Yuto Kamano. I feel like Josh King has been stellar. Liero in career best form. And then you got those towering wingers as well that start your sets the right way. My instinct is, let me know what you think, guys, but my instinct would be take the points with Cronulla. It's a lot of points. The Sharkies have won, is it 9 from their last 10 or 10 from their last 11? I've talked Cronulla up a lot of the way. Like, I do kick myself because in week 1 of the finals, I leaned to Sharks plus 1.5. Last week, I leaned to Sharks plus 4.5, but I didn't make them a best bet in either of those games. And I really have liked the Sharks all year, So that's a missed opportunity by me. But my point is, I'm not sort of surprised to see Cronulla here. Yes, the McInnes loss hurt, but it's given more responsibility to the likes of Blake Brayley and Hines. We know Hines is at his best when he just runs it. And when you've got Trindle, who has a halfback skill set, it allows Nico to freelance a bit more. Like, it was awesome the way they combined against the Raiders. Not for me because, that try was part of the game getting out of reach for Canberra. But it was an awesome moment for Cronulla. The defense is strong. The pack is powerful. The back five are physical. And it's just a team that's clicking. Now, while Cronulla did not have the luxury of resting in the regular season or, of course, last week, like Melbourne did, and Melbourne earned that, you have to say the Sharks, what they've got going for them is genuine momentum. And I think there's something to be said for knowing you're the underdog. And basically, if you're Cronulla, you're saying, we need an A or A-plus performance to go and win in Melbourne. So there's almost a freedom of let's just go and let it rip. You're not second guessing. You're not playing within yourself. You're not worried about anything other than the upcoming game. Just give it everything you've got and see how you go. And I think the most impressive element of the Sharks finals campaign has been their resilience, actually. The first 30 minutes against the Roosters were on top. but Cronulla only gave up 4 points. Mid-second half against the Roosters were completely on top of Cronulla, but Cronulla did not fold. They gave up 1 try in that period as well and answered with a couple of their own and won the game by 10 points. You look at the Raiders game, first 30 minutes, Cronulla's just hanging in there against a run of play and only giving up 6 points, and then ruthless when the pendulum swung. And the reason that's so important, I believe, is that you can almost guarantee the Sharks will be under the pump for periods against the Storm. And the key is you are going to concede, you are going to, get gassed and really be tested. But can you limit that Storm damage so that when it swings back the other way, then can you answer? And Cronulla have showed that great resilience. I don't have a best bet on this game, but I'll tell you the closest I came to was Sharks plus 4.5 first half. I think if you like Cronulla and there's 8.5s and 9.5s out there and you think they'll cover the full game line, I feel like you need a good first half. I feel like if the Sharks are down 6 or more and you're looking at players like Brayley, Hines, Kennedy, Trindle, I don't know. I like those guys a bit more when they're on the front foot or it's a tight game. That's okay. But I don't really want to be chasing points with Cronulla. And I also think there's a logical narrative that Cronulla could start well in this game because they've got momentum where Melbourne may have a little bit of ring rust. But of course, in the second half, that's going to be a real test of Cronulla's resolve and energy reserves. And you can see Melbourne kicking away. So then I could have played Cronulla with that first half start, but I started saying to myself, like, everything has just broken so well for Melbourne, and it's a great Melbourne team, and they're at home, and they're so well coached, and I know that the Storm will be ready. And I don't want to be guilty of telling you, hey, we should have been on Cronulla the last 2 weeks, and I'm going to play them this week. You don't play a team because you wished you were on them last week. It could be end of the road this week for Cronulla, as good as they've gone. And maybe Cronulla will regret dropping very winnable games in the middle of the year when they had no Origin players, and that cost the Sharks a top 4 spot. The Sharks finished 1 win behind New Zealand. I can think of a game they should have won. They should have beat New Zealand when New Zealand had like a few injuries. I think, or maybe it was an Origin week and no Barnett, and it was at Shark Park. My point is, if Cronulla bows out, you can say like there was a lot of talent there, and at least they got the monkey off the back because they did get finals wins. And they've been accused of never winning the big games. But to win the comp, it does help a lot to be top 4, which Cronulla was not. And I think this game could break open late. I'll give you a score prediction, something like 24-16 to Melbourne, which is why I haven't played over-under, because if I'm predicting about 40 points, the total is 40.5. I mean, I can't tell you who it's going to be when you got Grant, Pappenhausen, Munster, Hughes. Pick your poison. Is it Warbrick skying for a try over Katoa? But I just think that Melbourne are primed to play really well on Friday night. The thing is, though, the bookies aren't doing you any favors. Like, the bookies know how good Melbourne is, and so you're only getting in the $30s range, and you are having to lay nearly double digits against a really capable Sharks side. So I think the bookies, while they have obviously skewed their markets towards Melbourne, I can understand that reasoning. So that's why I didn't play it, but I've given you a fair breakdown. And the Undertaker has his best bet of the weekend, which is actually a multi-tying the 2 games together. So let's give him the last word on this game and the first word on the next.
G'day guys, Matty here. My tip of the week, I'm just going to do a 2-leg parlay. I'm going to go Penrith to win into Melbourne to win. Call me boring, but I think we're running last year's grand final back to Cronulla. I think they've overachieved a bit. Nice run, but Canberra in a rough spot last week. Cronulla took advantage, credit to them, but they're down facing a different animal now, playing Melbourne rested at home with some stars back too, Hughes and Pappenhausen. As for the Broncos, I think they're going to do it pretty tough without Carrigan, without Billy Walters and Penrith. I mean, they're just humming at the right end of the year. They fought a long fight to get this far, but they're not done yet. I think we're running back the grand final again. $2.31 for both teams to win this week. That's the way I'll be going. Good luck.
Let's move straight to Broncos Panthers, Sunday 4 p.m. at Suncorp. Penrith a 2.5-point favourite. Is there a 2023 redemption storyline here? I know this doesn't appeal to many of you, but the AFL Grand Finals on this weekend. I've noticed a couple of interesting AFL parallels, like in both sports, NRL and AFL, the minor premiers, the team that was first on the ladder for the whole regular season, got bounced in straight sets. That had not happened for 30 years in the AFL. It had not happened for 16 years in the NRL. So kind of crazy that it happened in both sports. But the other parallel that I've been looking at is 2023. Like, I'm not a diehard Broncos fan, but my dad is. I watched the grand final with my dad, and he loves the Lions as well. And it was a brutal weekend for Brisbaneites. 2023 grand final weekend. They were both on the same day. Same weekend, as opposed to this year. And Brisbane lost narrowly in both grand finals. And why I bring that up is because who did the Lions play in 2023? They played Collingwood. And the Lions met Collingwood in the prelim this year. And who did Brisbane play in the 2023 grand final? I'm sure you all remember it was Penrith. And who did Brisbane play in the prelim this year? You guessed it. And both times the venue switched states. And if you didn't know, the Lions got their revenge last weekend. So can Brisbane Broncos do the same? If you're a Broncos fan, you'll be glad to see Captain Renault is back at the helm. As brilliant as Benny Hunt has been, this is timely for a number of reasons. Right, first of all, Reynolds has a hamstring injury and was originally maybe in line to get back in the round 27 or round 26, but had the setback. But what you would be confident in as a Broncos fan is that Reynolds has not been rushed back in. Reynolds potentially could have played week 1 of the finals, and they've been able to give him an extra fortnight to get back up to speed, to get that training repetition with the team. Now, it's a devastating blow to Billy Walters and to Brisbane because of the season that Walters had. He played admirably at 6, and before that, when he would come in at hooker. But Madge is able to move Ben Hunt to 5/8, where he played for the first 10 weeks of the season because, of course, Mam was suspended. And, of course, the story with Ezra Mam is he did his hamstring in the same play as Reynolds. It was reportedly a more severe injury. So it is somewhat surprising to see Ezra is in the team this weekend as well, and he's in jersey number 14. And it must have been a more severe injury because he's about 10 years younger than Reynolds and needed longer to recover from it. But Mam also must be good to go because the Broncos did not have to risk that. I know Walters being out, but with Reynolds coming in, you only would be playing Mam off the bench if you think he's good to go. But at least you've got that risk mitigation. Now, Willison is also on the Brisbane bench, and that does cover, importantly, Paddy Tough Carry Carrigan, who accepted the high shot 1-game suspension. Jensen is actually starting alongside Haas, who was Herculean in Canberra. And, Haas is another classic case of a player that would have massively relished with that week without a game, because Haas is has been walking wounded as strong as he has played. In the Brisbane backline, you see it there, the mercurial Reece Walsh, flanked by Staggs and Shibasaki in the centres. Karapani and Mariner are favoured over Arthurs and Cobbo. And yes, Cobbo, who also did his hammy in the same game as his halves counterparts, I believe played Queensland Cup last weekend. So was it available this week? In fact, Arthurs and Cobbo are in the reserves. Piakura is on the left edge. That's great news for anyone in the TryPod group. Nicole tipped him at $13 anytime try scorer. He's under $5 now. It's a pretty good side, is it not, guys, for Brisbane? And they're at home. They get that confidence boost with the reinforcements, with a lot of class coming back in. 14 days to lock in. So now let's talk about this Penrith team. As someone said, I wish I had tickets. Yeah, that's going to be like the hottest ticket in town, right? Let's look at this Penrith side that is still the favourite in this contest. So Liam Martin, that was the most concerning injury. And it was an injury. Don't tell me it was nothing. He was still wincing in the tunnel when he thought like the cameras weren't on him anymore. They're saying ribs. I mean, I guess the thing about ribs is these days, or for many years, it's nothing that a needle can't fix, or a few needles. I'm sure it'll still be discomfort, but he's a tough hombre, that's for sure. Casey McLean had a hip pointer. And then Kenny, it's worth mentioning, came in from the reserves, had a successful return to the paddock. He returned from a hamstring injury of his own. When I look at Penrith's squad, like Leota stepped up even further in the absence of his great mate Fish. Lindsay Smith, which is not surprising, he got a Kangaroos jersey in the off season last year, and he's a skillful prop as well that has really done a job. Sorensen, ever reliable. On the bench for Penrith is Schneider to cover that playmaking positions. You've got Henry and IPAP that also offer a good mix of versatility and violence. They can come on and be super physical. They can also play middle or edge. Garner is another wide running forward, but can actually hold his own in the centres. I don't need to tell you what Nathan Cleary, Isaiah Yeo, Brian Toto can do. Arguably all the best in the world at their position. You got Alan Motti has been a monster, justifying Ivan's call to reinstate him. I want to talk about Dylan Edwards a little bit. I mean, it has been fair to call him by the humorous nickname Edwards Butterhands in the last month. He's had a lot of errors in his game, and you wondered if everything was all right with Edwards. But he did have a bit of a reminder game. Like, Dill was back to his best. I know he had that moment where he got penalised early. I heard James Graham going off about how it should have been a sin bin. I thought it was actually a really soft penalty. Like, it was basically nothing in it. I think it's a non-story. Obviously, what handed the Dogs that early 2 points there. But ultimately, Dylan Edwards had a great game on the weekend. So let me pose this question to you. Who should be Australia's fullback for the Kangaroos tour? Because you've got Teddy, who will win the Dally M. You got Edwards, who is the incumbent Australian fullback, the incumbent New South Wales fullback. He's won 4 comps in a row. He's in search of 5th. And then you got Walsh, who's the hottest player in the game, and that's on and off the field. I mean, could this game influence Kevy's pick? Kevy's obviously going to be in the house. Now, as for picks, my pick for this game, I think I like Brisbane. And I dead set think it should be about a pick 'em game here. I just think if there was ever a team that, would have gotten lifeblood out of having a week off, it was the Broncos. And on top of that, it's not just like the benefits you get from not playing round 2. It's the euphoria of that win in Canberra. That can be a win that fuels the fable amongst the squad and leaves no doubt in anybody's mind we are capable of special things. We are never beaten. And when we turn it on, no one can play with us. And yes, Carrigan is a huge loss, but Willison's really broken out this year. I would not be surprised if Willison was playing Origin in the next couple of years. He's deputised well there. And you get other class coming in. I'm not going to go the revenge angle of 2023 Demons because it's a prelim. The motivation is maximum no matter who your opponent is. But what I will say is if you told Brisbane you have to beat Penrith to win the comp, pretty reasonable. You've got to beat the champ to become the champ. I think this would be the perfect spot that you'd want to play Penrith. I think if you can say, we'll play them and we get them at home and we get them when we've had 14 days to prep and they had to play last week, like that's as good a time as ever. That's probably even better than catching Penrith in the grand final itself. Now, of course, it didn't work out too well the last time these sides met. This was a Magic Round encounter. In fact, I just remembered I had the same best bet. I had either team 1-12, and it was a different story in Magic Round. I think Brisbane was about a 5.5 point favourite. And I said, I like Penrith. I think Penrith can win this. I'm going either 1-12. And then Penrith unleashed a 32-8 win. How often do I go either 1-12 because I like the dog and then the dog wins 13+? I mean, but again, that's on me, and that's, I've got to change my approach if that's a pattern. But I still feel like this is a play that wins 60% of the time. That is either 1-12. It's just funny how the shoe's on the other foot. Like Brisbane was the better team going into Magic Round, and I liked Penrith as an underdog. And Brisbane, if you remember, were in a bit of a mid-season swoon. Brisbane lost like 5 of 6 or 4 of 5 in the middle of the year, and this was part of that. But Brisbane's kicked up several gears since then, so I'm not worried about the form for Brisbane on that day. I think we've all seen that Brisbane's got a lot of belief and a lot of ability. And then I'm not going to talk about Penrith for too long. What's left to say about how good this team is? And also, anytime I have doubted Penrith, like I loved Penrith in 2020, 21, and I did doubt them a little bit in 21 because they got a lot of injuries and they had to go the long way around. But I still picked them, in that grand final. 22, they were an unbeatable team. I liked them then. 23, I started to say, like, it's going to be very hard to win 3 comps in a row. And that was an unbelievable feat. 24, I said, no, they're not going to win 4 comps in a row. Like, I didn't see it happening. So Penrith proved me wrong last year. And going into this year, no way I thought Penrith could make it 5 in a row when they've lost, like, on average 2 world-class players every offseason for the last 5 years. And I think they've literally lost 17 grand final players in the last 5 years. But here they are again, and Penrith can win 5 comps in a row. They can. Look at the way they're positioned. I can't doubt them. I said mid-year, they're gone. They were last. And what I said was, I don't see Penrith climbing back into the finals when they've got 6 Origin players and the amount of energy, even if Penrith gets in, they won't have much left to spend in the finals. But somehow getting some wins with a few players out, just finding some outstanding form that allowed them to win about 8 or 9 in a row, getting that finals ticket, then being savvy enough to rest everyone in round 26, it's all really paid off. So it's set up really well. And additionally, I said this before, you sort of think that extra game, it's going to take it out of you. But it was one of the easiest wins of the year for Penrith because they blew the Dogs off the park first half. And that's not what you would have thought. You would have thought that a Doggies team would be so physical and that would be a battle. And the side coming out of that would have a lot of bruises. But Penrith, are looking pretty damn good. Talangi has blossomed, got better and better. That's an interesting debate. Who got the better of that switch? The Eels signed Ayongi, of course, from Penrith, and then Penrith went and nabbed Talangi. And I know one's a fullback, one's a 5'8", but they've both, got similar skill sets, and both clubs would be so happy with those moves. What's the difference between these teams on Sunday? It easily could be Nathan Cleary. But as James Graham says there, Ivan Cleary is the GOAT. His coaching this year has probably been his most impressive of the whole run based on who Penrith has had to slot in and who the team has lost. And of course, Nathan Cleary, his boot or just a moment of magic could be what sends Penrith to a 6th straight grand final. Yes, a 6th straight. They got for 5 comps, but they lost in the GF before that. Or is the difference the Suncorp crowd? And does that crowd swing a call or something here or there? And in a tight game, is it just that little bit of extra energy? Because it's not the same thing as winning in Sydney. Like, it is the next level to go interstate to win at Suncorp. I think Brisbane has every chance. I'm going to tip Brisbane, actually. I'm going to say 25-24. Could be that type of game. Again, my best bets are either team 1-12, which is 180 on 360, and neither team to score 31 plus. So that is both teams under 30.5 team total. And speaking of the total, it's 49.5, which, because these teams can both score for fun, I get it. Because it's a day game, I get it. But it's a finals game. And they're 2 really good defensive teams. And I know I just said 25-24, so that's under by half a point. But that the total feels excessive to me. But maybe it's because the bookies have to protect against a lot of same gamers with picking all the try scorers, and Penrith just played a game with 70-odd points in that. So that's how I see this one. I dead set think, it's got all the potential to be a beauty, and it's the atmosphere is going to be unbelievable. So very jealous of you if you're going to be there in attendance. To some of our Brisbane followers, and there's plenty of Brisbane followers that follow the pod because that's where the pod was born. One last tip I've got for you guys is from Nicole. So even though he already gave you this gem of Piakura, he's going to double up and give you another play, a try scorer for this week.
Hey everyone, it's Nicole from Wiki. Hope you guys saw my post about Brendan Piakura yesterday. He was paying $13 to score a try anytime on 365, 67 for first and last try as well. He's down to less than half that price and a decent cash out. I personally always like to hold and ride, so good luck if you did get on that one. 2 tips from me, guys, very quickly. Stags, super boring tip. I hate betting on backs for try scorers, but he's paying $3.30 on 365. Most of the bookies and our model all agree he should be closer to $2.50. But my hot tip, my favorite tip for this weekend, Ben Tolte from the Brisbane Broncos. He scored 25 tries in 89 reserve grade games, 3 tries in 9 NRL games, and with no Carrigan, should still get decent minutes. Obviously, Willison coming back from injury, Mam on that bench as well. Tolte should get his roughly 30 minutes, and I love him at about $21 on Bet365. Good luck, punt responsibly. Our app and everything else from Wiki is free. Just Google Wiki Linktree, it's all there.
Thanks to Nicole. So, in fact, he's got 3 try scorer tips on the line. Of course, he hit at 950 in the final week of the regular season. So, his tips aren't going to hit every week. But he did get joy just a couple of weeks ago and given you some good options there. Let me know how you see it, guys. Of course, always appreciate the feedback on my best bets and any other really good bets you see out there that I might have missed. I love to carry the conversation on in the comments wherever you did find this online show or podcast. If there's any tips for the AFL Grand Final, I haven't really left much time for anyone to shoot anything in the comments, but let us know in the video comments as well, because of course, if you're a sports fan, there's a fair chance you're going to want to have a look at that and maybe try and find a winner on that as well. But check out the TryPod group. We've got AFL tipsters in our group as well, in our community, as we do for just about every sport and event, which I really appreciate. So thanks for tuning in. Appreciate you all as well. Hope you enjoy the smorgasbord of footy on this weekend, and I'll see you next Tuesday. Lego.